I learned something during that process that has stuck with me. When it comes to these situations with your job, it's a job related. Sometimes it's legal stuff. Man, if you're just gut level honest with people and they know it's like, this has got to be really hard for him to be honest about.
Yeah.
Doors fly open. Their guard goes down and they'll be like, how can we help? And that's exactly what happened.
Let's be honest about recovery.
The rewards, the challenges.
Let's talk about our failures.
We are flawed people, after all.
Let's challenge the stigmas that weigh us down.
Because while most of us are looked at,
Few of us are seen.
Let's talk about addiction.
And how Christ overcomes our weaknesses.
Because we are loved.
because we are loved.
Because we are loved.
We are loved.
We are
Because
loved.
we are loved.
Hello, my name is Ross, and this is my story. I'm 42 years old. I'm originally from Baton Rouge. I started with drugs and alcohol in my teenage years. Quickly, that turned into hardcore drug use. For the next 20 plus years, I was in and out of serious addiction, in and out of rehab. But the main thing was I was running from God. I was running from what I knew to be true. But God was, He called me, and He was not going to let me get away that easily. God humbled me and disciplined me to where I submitted, and I've been clean and sober ever since.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to a new podcast called Jesus Loves Addicts. We are really excited to be here. My name is Paul. This is my co-host, Kathryn, and we will be talking to a vast array of people here on this show who are really taking a beautiful risk to come here and tell their story. Jesus Loves Addicts is really about the good, the bad, and the ugly of walking through addiction and into recovery. Our first episode was done with a good friend of ours, Ross Richard, and so as you might imagine, that conversation went on for a while. So you get the privilege of hearing 2 episodes with Ross as we were privileged to record them. And so please enjoy our first episode with Ross Richard and tune in next week for episode number 2. Ross, thanks for just, being brave enough to be here, right? It's when you're asked to hop on a podcast and share your story, that can be daunting.
Well, when I was begging God to help me, I kind of made a deal with Him that if people would ask to hear my story, I would never say no if I was able to do it.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic.
I'm trying to keep that vow.
Yeah, probably putting the cart in front of the horse on this one, but that really just echoes that sentiment. Part of my background is in the 12 steps, and which are very biblically based.
Sure.
And that 12th step of giving back, I hear that really strongly in that statement. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Would you mind kind of just telling us and the folks kind of a little bit about your story to get started?
Sure. So I grew up in Baton Rouge, had a pretty normal childhood. It was a good childhood. But I was always, even at a young age, I can look back and I was always curious about things that would make me feel different. When I would read about drugs or whatever, it wasn't like I was like, man, I shouldn't do that. I was always like, oh, man, I bet you that probably feels pretty good. So it was kind of a recipe for disaster. I was very hyperactive. I wasn't really bad until I got into drugs, but I was very hyperactive and hard to... Like, all my teachers loved me, but I was very hard to keep quiet and seated.
Can I pause you just for a second? Because I want to hear all this. But the thing you actually just started with has captured me already, the interest. Because I would think that for most kids, the initial response to something different might be scary. Yet you're saying for you, it was immediately an enticement. What do you think it was that captured it for you about wanting to feel different? What do you think was so captivating about that versus scary?
I don't know, but I from a young age, I was very interested in the 60s and 70s counterculture movement. And a big part of that, when you would read in the encyclopedia or whatever, it always would talk about marijuana and LSD. Those were the two big ones. When I was a kid, when you start hearing about cocaine or heroin, those I was like, I'll never do those. But I definitely wanted to experiment with alcohol, marijuana, and most probably LSD from a pretty young age. I just thought it was cool because I was listening to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and stuff like that. It's just what I associated with cool.
Sure.
And I was too young and naive to realize when I would talk about these things, I think other people, they didn't kind of see it the way I did. So I think it kind of concerned maybe my youth group leaders and stuff. And because I remember specific conversations of people like, I know you're going to experiment with drugs. Like, you really should not. They could just tell by how my personality was that I kind of wanted to experience everything.
Amen. Well, I appreciate that, and I'm going to get you back onto your story, but that's I can understand that, right?
Yeah.
They are now. I hear the appeal for a child, right? We want to know what makes our heroes tick, and for you, your heroes with the 60s, 70s counterculture, and as you said, that was a prominent feature. So thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah.
I want to add.
Yeah.
You're probably only the second or third person in addiction recovery that has mentioned long before they ever picked up a substance.
Yeah.
It was an indication that our brains were wired differently. The people that would come and talk to us at school in the 4th and 5th grade and say, what was the whole slogan? Say no to drugs.
Say no to drugs.
But your brain didn't.
But like when they would come do their presentation, I was like, tell me about drugs.
Yes.
It's like saying say no to dessert.
I knew in my mind the first person that would offer me marijuana, I was doing it.
Yeah.
I was doing it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Taking cigarettes from my grandmother when I was very young, what is a cigarette going to do to a kid? You just want to do adult stuff, I guess, is what you kind of associate it with.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
So, well, thanks. So you were entering this phase where you're talking about kind of the being your word, hyperactive, ADD, maybe
yes,
kid.
I was, and that was right in the era of, the medicated child. I was taking stimulants in kindergarten. So I did the whole Ritalin thing, and it calmed me down. I didn't really have an appetite. I didn't like taking them because I felt like it changed my personality. I remember a couple of my friends kind of saying, we don't like when you take those things. Like, you're not really Ross. But my teachers were like, please take your medicine. And then that turned into, then Adderall came out, and I especially could not stand taking that. So when I got to be about 13, 14, I think, I told my mom, you can't make me swallow that pill. I'm just not doing it. So I just quit taking it.
What was was there a rebound from that? Like, how did when you finally were able to step away from that, what was the outcome behaviorally? I'm just curious.
I want to say it's right around the time when I started smoking pot. So I don't know if that's related, if I was self-medicating. I don't think I really was self-medicating because I didn't mind being hyper. I didn't care.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be different. All the adults around me wanted me to calm down and be quiet.
Yeah, it's a shame. I've heard discussion about, how sometimes there's an attempt to, and I'm sure this is true for both sexes, but I think kind of taking the boy away from the boy. Boys tend to be a little bit more hyperactive, and unfortunately, there's a whole story around that. So I appreciate.
I can confidently say I was also immature.
Yeah.
I was immature for my age. I was already young for my class. For whatever reason, I went to a Christian school, and everybody, I think they did another year of preschool or something, but I was like 9 months younger than everybody in my class. So I was already young, but even then, once my parents held me back in 8th grade because I was so much more immature than the boys around me, I guess, and not only physically, just by the way how I was if I was being responsible about things and stuff like that. And I can say even when I was held back, I was still a little immature. So, yeah, super impulsive, very hyperactive.
Was that something that initially you resented, or did you immediately appreciate that, or was, how did being held back, how was that viewed in your life?
Ooh, so I was, I was close friends, especially with the guy group. But for most of the kids, I had gone to school with them through kindergarten. This was a small school. I usually had 10 people in my class, 10, 15 people. So it was a big shock. Another kid that I grew up with, he got held back too, but that was for sports reasons. But yeah, it was and it was in 8th grade. So all of my friends were going on to high school.
Yeah.
So it was like I was literally being left behind. I will say once I got held back, I was then the older guy. So I got more attention from the girls. So then I quickly didn't care anymore.
I love it. Got some street cred in the second round.
So yeah,
that's great.
Girls like the older guys. And I guess guys like the older girls too when you're that young. But yeah, the
appeal of adulthood. Yeah. So okay, so you get held back, and so then enter the high school years, right? So what?
So looking back on it, I thank God that I was given some above average intellect, I would say, because I had always gotten through school strictly on my intellect. I would pay attention in class. I would usually never not be paying attention. And I could just remember stuff and figure out the test or whatever that I was passing with C's and B's. So I would never do my homework, anything like that. The older you get, the more you can't figure out trig on your own or algebra 2. Like you have to
actually study.
You have to and keep up with your homework and stuff. So, and the teachers became less and less like, it's okay, little Ross, or what, it's like, no, you need to start acting like you're about to be an adult, So there was that. And then, like I said, I wanted to be in the cool crowd. I mean, what kid doesn't, right? I went to a school with, it's a private school. So Baton Rouge, you don't typically go to a Christian school for being a Christian. I would say at least half of the kids go there because you want a good education.
Right.
So I hadn't figured that out yet. So I was there because it was a Christian school. So a lot of the kids that were there were their family had a lot more money than me, and they weren't necessarily their parents weren't necessarily Christians. They might say that they were, but it wasn't like the home environment that I had.
Right.
It's where all decisions that were made were based out of Christianity, right? But I wanted to be in the cool crowd, so a lot of those kids were not Christians. And they also had a lot of money.
Yeah, which is typically part of private school. But
sure.
Would you say at this point, we don't need to go too far down this road because I know it's coming and part of your story. It's one of the pleasures I have of getting to know you. But at this point in your life, because you're mentioning a lot of times people are there not because they're Christian, just because it's a private school and they want a good education. I know you came from a professing Christian home. Would you identify yourself as a Christian at this point?
Oh, yeah. I was heavily involved with youth group.
Okay.
And it was the same group of guys that I'd gone to school with. Almost all of my school friends, minus one really that I can think of, we went to the same school. We went to the same church. So my school actually formed out of my church. The first year that it was a school, they held it on our church. It wasn't officially affiliated, but there was a lot of overlap of the same people.
So personally, though, you would have identified as a Christian at that time, because certainly church attendance doesn't even necessarily make us a Christian. But
sure, but I can never really remember a time where I did not know, at least on a very basic level, the gospel.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, I go back and forth, y'all, on, when I truly became a Christian, and I go back and forth. I honestly don't know the exact time, because I look at the fruit and how I lived my life for so long. And, there's some scripture that is pretty clear that it's just like, I would not be able to live like that and be a Christian. But, I looked around at the other people that I was hanging around with, and I could tell that something was different between us. And the older I got, the more I realized it was because I was being convicted, which I believe was the Holy Spirit, and they didn't have that issue, which is what I thought at the time. I was like, man, I don't like this. Yeah. Why do I always feel guilty about all these things that everybody else is?
You didn't want to feel guilty.
No.
It was ruining it.
You're right. So I wanted to have fun, guilt-free fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's an interesting point, isn't it? Because that's and again but hey, that's what conversation's about. We're not necessarily going to stay linear, but I love that because behavior does not always equate to position, right? So we wax and wane in our discipline in our walk, don't we? Yes. And just because I'm in a place where I might be distant doesn't mean I'm not a Christian. But the Spirit will call us back, that conviction you're talking about. So I have a feeling we're going to get there, though. I did want to ask you a question. In your 30-second testimony, you were talking about by the time you were out of high school, you kind of went from prescription drugs to always kind of having an entertainment value in your head about what drugs might mean. Yeah. And then by the time you graduated, you talk about being on hard drugs. What, and that can be a different definition for everybody. So most of my high school years were, that private school that I went to, by the time I was in the very beginning of my junior year, I wasn't technically expelled, but it was like, you can leave or we're going to kick you out. Mm-hmm. So to protect my academic reputation or whatever, my transcript. An invitation.
Right. So, and I want to say it wasn't just one thing. It was the totality of a bunch of things.
But what did hard drugs mean to you? Like what was
it was cocaine. Okay. But during my high school years, all of my drug use was a social thing for me. I instantly was in the cool crowd. The cool crowd liked having me around. They thought I was fun. And alcohol, marijuana, and then that kind of progressed into Valium was easy to get back then. 2 Valium and a 6-pack of beer that was a good time as far as I was concerned. But then senior year of high school, it was to the point where I was like, I want to try cocaine. And all of my friends were like, and these are friends that were not Christian because I was at a public school now, right? Yeah. So I was not surrounded by really any Christians. But even to them, it was like cocaine.
They were using all the other with you.
It was a different stratosphere of drugs or whatever that you would call it. So, but I wanted to do cocaine. I did cocaine. Where I had to go, see, I was a kid. I didn't know real drug dealers other than my friends that sold pot. I didn't know actual drug dealers. So I kind of used my brain, and I was like, that part of town seems like it's got a lot of drugs. This is a poor part of Baton Rouge, right by LSU. Well, yeah, they sell powder cocaine, but they use that powder cocaine to cook up crack cocaine. So, within a couple months of trying cocaine for the first time, I was hooked. Mm-hmm. And the reason I said my normal drug use up to then was social, it immediately, like night and day, was a private thing. I knew well enough to know what you're doing is not socially acceptable. You're going to be ostracized. People are going to make fun of you for doing it, for the whole connotation of crackhead. These are kids, they haven't gone through any problems in their life at all. So it's very easy to point at somebody like, look at this clown, So I knew well enough that it was like, you have to do that privately. And it was me and a friend that we kind of, how it happened was, we went to go get powder, and the guy bringing it back was like, I couldn't get powder. Here's a rock. And I can honestly say I was instantly addicted. Instantly. And, they say that there are certain drugs that certain people do and they're instantly addicted, and I can attest to that.
Yeah.
And as soon as I started doing it, That was the first time I was doing something where I knew, Ross, you're playing with fire. This is a new level of it takes over. It completely changes how you are. You're like a robot. You have to have more. I was 17 years old. I couldn't afford a hard drug, so I couldn't really do a lot of damage. But I knew there was like, this is not good.
But you also knew that you had to have it.
Sure, but I never liked it. Like, I never liked the idea of it. I always was like, if I could push a button and go back in time and never have done this, I would. Please, where is that button?
Well, it's a love-hate relationship, isn't it?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, drugs hijack your brain. They make you make decisions you would not normally make.
I'd like to take a moment to recognize a major podcast sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by America's Thrift Stores, your go-to option for decluttering and giving back. You have a closet bursting at the seams or a garage that's seen better days? We've got the perfect solution for you.
That's right. America's Thrift Stores makes it easy to clear out the clutter and make a positive impact in your community. Whether you are cleaning out your wardrobe, downsizing your living space, or just looking to give back, America's Thrift Stores has you covered.
And here's the best part. You've got options. Schedule a hassle-free home pickup, drop off your items at one of their convenient donation sites, or swing by an America's Thrift Store to donate in person. No matter which way you choose, you're making a difference.
Every donation you make to America's Thrift Stores directly benefits charities in your area, such as the Home of Grace and other fantastic organizations dedicated to helping those in need.
For example, donations made to America's Thrift Stores in southern Mississippi help the Home of Grace provide support and assistance to individuals facing drug and alcohol addiction. Your contributions make a real impact on their mission to provide freedom from addiction through Christ-centered recovery. So, not only are you decluttering your life, but you're also helping build a stronger and more supportive community.
It's truly a double blessing, so what are you waiting for? Clean out that closet, clear out that garage, and make a positive difference in your community by donating to America's Thrift Stores.
Visit America's Thrift Stores online to schedule a home pickup, locate a donation site near you, or get directions to one of their store locations.
America's Thrift Stores, where giving back never goes out of style. I have a question.
Yeah.
So you said something about how it goes from social use to basically whenever you get that drug of choice, per se, it goes to that isolative use. Mm-hmm. And I've heard it's, we can say, well, I knew that I'd be ostracized. But at any point, do you think it's because you wanted to protect that use and you really weren't? As much as you wanted that button, do you see what I'm like, that kind of back and forth? It's like, yes, I wish I wouldn't have done this, but now I'm here and I'm not all the way ready to let it go just yet because it hadn't cost me a lot.
Maybe it was, if anybody's done drugs, you know the types of homes and trailers you go to get these hard drugs, they're pretty bad, right? So I knew, I was like, I can't bring any of my friends around here. They're going to be like, are you crazy? You're going in there? Like, this is not safe, So I don't know if it's really like you said. Maybe on a subconscious level, that I would be protecting the drug, but I think it really was like, I knew well enough that like, this is not socially acceptable in any kind of way with the kind of crowd that I ran with, and I ran with a hard partying crowd.
Yeah.
17-year-olds,
sure.
Crack cocaine. It's, but I couldn't really hide it because the behavior that comes along with hard drug use, you can't hide.
Yeah.
Stealing, lying, disappearing for chunks of time that you can't explain.
You probably don't know that until you're looking in hindsight, right? Because we always feel like we're covering it perfectly, right? When you're in it, you think that, I've got this.
It's been so long ago, I really can't remember. But I always thought I was a lot smarter than I really was.
Yes.
Because you can, especially when you're young, you can confuse natural God-given book smarts or intelligence with real
Yeah.
Common sense.
Sure. Yeah. We all think we're, intelligentsia when we're younger. But, I think it's worth saying, and I love that you're sharing this, and trust me, I'm hearing some of this as a father. And, I preach to my 10-year-old all the time, don't chase after what society tells you is cool, right? There's such a weird and distorted definition of what cool is anymore. So anyway, I'm going to spare everybody my father lecture. But it's interesting. You also said that the kind of places that it takes you to, the trailers, the broken down houses. And I think that's true for us, middle class, whatever. But it's the other side of addiction is that it knows no economical boundaries, right? And so we kind of have two classes of drug dealer. You have what you're talking about, and then you have the guy servicing the doctors, the lawyers, the rock stars. Right. It really crosses all economical lines.
At 2:30 in the morning, when you want some cocaine, you're not going. I mean, I don't know any drug. I was 17 years old, but I knew a part of town I could just drive. I could literally drive down the street and be like, "Yo, where's it at?"
Yes.
Which brings up another point. When you constantly have people coming to your neighborhood, you don't have any money for whatever reason, and people are constantly asking you to get drugs. I can see the temptation.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense, not good sense, but it makes sense. So here you are, zipping along and headlong into your addiction. What began to happen, and where did you reach the turning point for you?
A big event in my life. I had met a girl. I went to college for a semester, and I mean, I was in no way, shape, or form ready for that kind of freedom with the responsibility of actually having to perform and make good grades and study without somebody making you study. I was no way ready for that. So I flunked out of college, and I met a girl we were passing through Florida, and I met a girl, and she was from Baton Rouge. She was a good girl. Didn't smoke pot. She drank a little bit, but she was very studious. And, we got into a pretty serious relationship.
Opposites attract.
Yeah. Well, I think she saw in me my potential. I mean, that's how women are, right?
We're going to fix you.
Yeah. She saw the potential in me. And while I cared about her deeply, I was very much attracted to her. I also saw it as like, this is somebody that can take care of me. Try to fix me in some way, shape, or form. Kind of just like I could see she was going places, so I'm going to just grab the coattails. I don't think I consciously knew that at the time, but I think that's a fair assessment. And we got into a pretty serious relationship, and the timing of it was interesting. We had been together for a few months, and I was just floundering. I didn't really have a steady place to live, couch surfing with my friends, not really working. This girl had a lot of ambition, and she was about to tell me, like, I like you, think you're cool, but, like, this is not going to work. I'm in school. It's a big deal. She was an architecture student. And I'm sure, she never told me this, but I'm sure her family was kind of like, what is this kid doing? Working menial jobs. Why is he not trying to better himself? Anyway, and at that same time, I had it wasn't a sudden experience, but it was over a couple days of basically, I look back on it and I think it was God really putting it on me, kind of like, you need to do something drastic with your life. What are you doing? Like, you're now of the age where people aren't just going to take care of you. You're not a kid anymore, right? And my brother, who I hadn't really got into him yet, but he had been drinking and smoking pot and eating acid with me all through high school. And he had an experience that he did not like and he dropped it all and got saved pretty radically.
A drug-induced experience when you say that?
I can't really remember. I seem to think it was an LSD experience, and he experienced some stuff that he knew was not just the drugs. And he basically, I think he got up to the line of addiction and looked around and was like, this is not for me. He knew the truth, and he knew that Christianity was true. So he kind of, he was just a freshman in college at LSU and had a radical transformation. So anyway, when God started really working on me at this point, I kind of went to him and I was like, Scotty, I want to make a change. And, I tried. I moved back in with my parents. That was the big thing. I wasn't really talking to my parents. So I went to them hat in hand, and I'm like, I need to like get a car. I need to get a good job. And I need a place to live to get back on my feet. I did that and started going to church. Started going to there was a Christian, I think this is right at the kind of the infancy of Celebrate Recovery, but it wasn't Celebrate Recovery, but it was something similar that my brother was a part of. He was part of the band. He played guitar. And I was going to that, and this is right around the time when I said this girl, Sarah, was about to drop me. Yeah. Move on. And it was like the timing of it. She saw this as like a sign that like, he's got potential. So she stayed with me. The experience that I had didn't really last long. I didn't really make any new friends that I connected with. And I'd been with the same group of friends for a long time, and we were very close. And it just slowly was just, I started drinking. I wasn't really smoking a lot of pot at that time, but I was still binge cocaine use. Typically, I would get drunk and I think I'm going to go home, and disappear for 36 hours. I still wasn't making enough money to really do a ton of damage, but, doing that kind of drug, dating the kind of girl that I was at the time, it was a big wedge in our relationship. And she eventually broke up with me. I went on one of many benders. I swear I'll never do it again. She was smart enough to realize, like, something's got to give here, right? So she broke up with me. That was very traumatic for me. I don't know if traumatic's the right word, but it was a big deal in my life. And probably, and let me back up a little bit. A couple years before that, before I went to my parents and was like, hey, I need some help, the word had gotten out in my social circle. Even people I didn't really know, there were people that, I'll just tell the story. I was known to kind of pick things up that wasn't mine for drug purposes. I wasn't like a real deal thief. I wasn't going into people's houses and stuff like that. But my friends who had moved into a not great part of town, their apartment got broken into. All of their guitars got taken, their TVs and stuff. So they were already suspicious of me. And I went over there like an idiot, got tipsy, and I joked with my buddy about, hey, I have those guitars, by the way, if you want to. And it was an obvious joke. I thought it was an obvious joke. And that was the next 5 years of my life with that group of friends. I could not get them to believe that I did not do that. Like I said, at this time, people are still very young. Nobody had really gotten into addiction yet. I experienced addiction years before anybody in my social circle really, because once you experience addiction, you have a lot more empathy for other people that have it. When you've never experienced, you almost feel better than like Like,
well, it's easy to get angry at the addict.
Well, and also judgmental.
Yeah.
Like, I would never do that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm not going to hang out with you. And then when you're not there, just talk trash. There was some other stuff about, there were some girls involved that might have been a reason why a couple of them were mad at me. But anyway, so that fed my addiction even more, because I would almost be, I didn't want to go around certain people because it was very awkward. And then people that I didn't even know, especially some of them, one of the more like rough, or not rough, but more rude people, they would crack jokes in public at parties or whatever about, crackhead this or whatever. And it's just like, when you're that young, that really affected me. And what does that do when you have an addiction? It just drives you into more isolation and more drug use. So fast forward, this girl drops me, and the whole time, when I realized I couldn't stop, I knew I needed to go to rehab, but I didn't want to go to rehab because I knew well enough if I went to rehab, as soon as you go to rehab, the kind of parents that I had, that was like, that's it.
That's it.
No more alcohol. No more, and they never really were accepting of any of that anyway, because they're conservative and they were Christian, so they didn't really accept any of that, especially when I was under 21. But I knew if I go to rehab, which I need to go, gigs up.
They get real educated.
Because I didn't want to quit drinking. I didn't want to quit doing what I wanted, partying, having fun. I like to go to concerts. I traveled all over the country to concerts, doing drugs at concerts. That was a big part of my life. And I knew, my parents didn't know what I was doing at these things that I went to, but I knew they would start being like, wait a second. Because then they're going to get educated on addiction, and it's not just like, we need to pray about this and you need to be more responsible. It's like, wait a second, you got a problem. You can't drink. You can't smoke pot. I
think
there's going to be more eyes on me.
One of the books I saw in one of the first treatment centers for parents was How to Say No to Your Adult Children.
Yeah.
And then that's what it is. They start learning those boundaries, and if I'm not ready, I don't want you to read that book.
Sure.
And I don't want you to attend the classes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Gigs up.
Yeah.
Before we go any further, let's take a minute to address the man or the woman listening to today's episode and wishing for a better life. Or maybe addiction has completely overtaken a family member or a friend.
You are not alone. As you may know, the Jesus Loves Addicts podcast is produced by the Home of Grace, a Christ-centered addiction recovery program in South Mississippi with over 60 years of experience.
The Home of Grace has residential programs ranging from 30 days to 12 months. With 2 separate campuses for men and women, they are fully staffed with caring individuals who want nothing more than to guide you to a life of recovery.
Services include individual and group counseling, marriage and family counseling, classes, workshops, GED, and workforce training, all grounded in biblical principles.
And because of donations from the community, the cost of the program is incredibly affordable.
Thousands of alumni from all across the country can tell you there is no other program in the world quite like the Home of Grace.
If you want to start a new path to recovery, don't wait. Speak with their admissions specialist today. Visit homeofgrace.org or call 833-55-GRACE to talk with someone.
That's 833-55-GRACE. Call the Home of Grace today. And there's such an interesting push-pull, if you will. And like you're talking about, on one hand, I mean, literally within minutes. And by the way, I'm pointing this out because I hear it time and time again with addicts and with people in general. On one hand, I'm losing friends, right? My reputation is ruined with people who I enjoyed because my character is being diminished by the lifestyle I'm doing, right? We got to take ownership for that. Mm-hmm. And then in the next breath, you're like, but I didn't want to let go of it. I'm still having fun. I'm going concert to concert. And the image that came to my mind is, it's funny because this is what we do as addicts, right? We capture the 10 things in my life are going wrong, one's going right, and I'll go, see, I'm still doing okay. But
right,
the image that came to my head, and pardon me, analogies are my thing, and often they're really bad.
Me too. I love analogies or metaphors, whatever you want to call them.
But if we don't think of other things like that, right? If I go to a restaurant and I have one bad experience, it's likely I'm not going back again. Or if I'm driving in my car and I hear a slight knocking, I don't go, oh, well, everything else from my radio is still working great. I'm just going to keep. Right? I get that looked at. In our own lives, though, it's so easy to overlook that destruction that's happening around us because we choose not to see it. Does that kind of ring true?
So I would counter that analogy of...
a counter analogy.
So that would be... let me try to think of a good one. The first one that comes to mind would be like, I need a new engine. But I don't know if that really works. But basically... There's something big wrong. I want that fixed, but I don't want all this other stuff. Like I was not ready to quit drinking. I was not ready to quit smoking pot. I definitely was not ready for Christianity. That was, and I had a feeling I kind of grouped that all together. I just wanted the cocaine to be gone, and I was at the point after a couple years of doing it. I knew, Ross, you can't do cocaine. When I would even do it, snort it, it would take over. I wouldn't be able to talk straight. So I grew up with a speech impediment. I stutter. I've learned how to control it. I'm sure I've stuttered a few times on here. You don't realize it because I've learned how to kind of zip it into the next syllable.
Interesting.
My dad actually had a very bad speech impediment. Kind of weird. It's hereditary, and only guys have it. It's strange.
That is.
Look it up. It's pretty interesting. Anyway.
Topic for the next podcast. Yeah, I like that.
Interesting. But, and part of stuttering, it's there's a lot of shame and embarrassment involved when you can't get your name. Funny thing, R's are the hardest thing to say. Double R's are even harder. My dad's name is Ron Richard. He stuttered. My name is Ross Richard. So whenever I would do cocaine, I wouldn't even be able to say my name.
Yeah.
So everyone would be like waiting for me to say my name. I wouldn't be able to get it out. Like, whoa. So it made the shame a whole lot worse. I was like, this sucks. I can't do cocaine.
Yeah.
A switch had been flipped, and I didn't really enjoy it. After about the first 10 minutes of doing the first line, say I was not freebasing coke, I was snorting cocaine. Cause at this time, there was a couple friends that were cool with every once in a while getting a gram of powder cocaine and doing it. But even that, my whole night would be ruined.
Yeah.
To where I was like, I don't like this.
Yeah.
And I knew it doesn't matter what form the cocaine is in, you can't do it.
Right.
Period.
Mood altering chemicals, really, because they'll all lead you back to your.
But I wasn't there yet.
Yeah.
I wasn't there yet. I knew. Well, I can say that I got wise to where, Ross, when you do benzos, you go to the dope man almost every time. Things that really lower your inhibitions to a drastic degree, like Valium or Xanax. I wasn't a big fan of Xanax. I didn't find them very fun. I just kind of like forgot everything. But Valium.
So you're mentioning now
enjoyable.
An array of drugs. Did it get to the point where pretty much anything somebody would offer you, you would give it a shot? I mean, are we?
I was never into opiates. I did not like them at that time. I didn't really. I kind of got out of taking benzos too. In my own way, I was trying to kind of come up with my own recipe to not disappear and spend all my money on crack.
To be able to drink and use successfully on
Sure, I wasn't really there yet. I'm sure there were times where I was probably, I know I was telling my family and this girl I was dating that I was not doing certain things, and I was. And I don't think I ever really believed that I was gonna, I always knew, I'll just do it around my friends, that these people are not gonna be there.
Well, let me ask you a question, because I love how you're painting the picture, right? I mean, addiction takes us down a dark road. It doesn't start that way. It kind of wines us and dines us. It earns our trust, and then it pulls the rug out from under us. So If you would summarize kind of how bad it got and then lead to that point, what was the moment for you where you said, something's got to change? Because I want to hear about, obviously we want to talk about the turnaround as well. Where did that change happen for you?
Sure. But Paul, this is, my story's over 25 years. So there's a lot of back and forth, going forward, going backwards.
Yeah,
so I would say the first time that I went to treatment, I ended up, I'm sure, doing cocaine or something, and I got stuck at this house, and I shot up for the first time. We were shooting up cocaine, and then we were also shooting up morphine. Now that I liked.
Yeah.
I didn't like it enough to where, cocaine was my thing. If I was going to binge, that's what I was going to do. And I didn't have money to be doing a lot of other things. It was never, especially in my 20s, I was never really seeking help for the right reasons. I was seeking help because, I just got fired. I don't have a way to support myself. I can't pay my rent. And my parents were like, well, why? It's obvious. They at this point knew I would disappear for 36 hours, come back drenched in sweat, lips all blistered up, thumb all burned up from the crack pipe, whatever. So, there was no hiding it when I would go on these binges. So it was to the point that my family, as soon as I said needles, that was it. Yeah. It was like, you're going to rehab. And I went to a rehab in Florida, Navarre Beach, secular 12-step. We didn't even think about them being a Christian rehab. Probably I would have talked them out of that. I knew that's what I needed, but I wasn't ready yet. I was not going there. And side note, the guy that owned it was the doctor that was helped invent Suboxone. So it was and this was right when it was 2006. Yeah. It was kind of in its infancy. That doesn't really have anything to do with anything, but yeah.
Interesting.
And so I went, and like always in rehab, this was the first one I went to, but like always, I very quickly, if there was some position of special privileges or a leadership position, I was always put in that position. This place, I was the mayor. I didn't really have any power or anything, but I would be responsible for, I can't even really remember, but I was elected by it's kind of weird to think about, but over the course of my life, I went to a lot of rehabs, and I would always curry special favors and get out of having to do the same stuff that everybody, I guess because I was charming, and it wasn't, I don't think it was manipulative, but hey, maybe it was, but I always knew I probably need to be doing all this stuff. But I always am given some position where I don't have to do all that other stuff, and
But you made straight A's in treatment.
Huh?
But you made straight A's in treatment.
So it was a money making operation. I feel bad because my parents really sacrificed to send me there, and even then I knew it was a joke. It was co-ed. Oh, so they had people. Boyfriends and girlfriends, guys asking the girls out, sneaking in their room, having sex, all that stuff. And even if they're not having sex, if you're just crushing on a girl, are you thinking about rehab?
Yeah,
come on, you're getting high on this girl or whatever. So the whole place was a joke. And, but when I was leaving, my counselor told my family, 28 days is not enough. He needs to go to another place. And I went to a place in Clarksdale, Mississippi, called Fairland, run by who has turned out to be a pretty big figure in the Mississippi counseling scene. His name was Shane Gerard. He was a program director there. And that was a completely different experience. It was secular. It was 12 steps. But I really started seeing wait, there's cool people. That these people like the same kind of bands that I like, and they're having fun. I can see, I'm gonna just watch that they're having fun, and this is something that I could do. and, got out of there after I did their extended stay, whatever, and got out of there. And there was a guy that I had gotten to be good friends with in Florida. He was like, because I didn't have anywhere to go. I really did. I wanted to act like, but I didn't want to like humble myself in front of my parents. I can't even remember back that far, but I think that was what it was. And so he was like, my parents own a restaurant in Destin. Come live with me. I'm like, hey, come on, let's go. So I went there. That was a lot rougher than I anticipated in that I felt kind of like an intruder on their family. I don't think he really asked them if he could bring me there, and they were too nice to be like, why are you bringing this guy here?
You probably weren't the first.
Yeah. So
that warms the hearts of every parent.
And also, maybe it was in my mind, maybe it wasn't, but like everybody that I would meet in his extended social circle, they knew me as the guy that this guy brought from rehab. So it was just kind of like I could never really feel like I was my own like I felt like people were already prejudiced against me, whether good or bad, whatever. Right. But I was always through the lens of this guy that he brought from rehab that clearly doesn't have anywhere to go.
Predetermined.
So it was a cool experience, but I ended up taking his truck without asking, and Florida gets really pure cocaine, it turns out, and that was bad. Binged a couple times, and finally they were like, yeah, you got. I got my own apartment by this time. I was doing AA, but after getting out of that treatment facility, it wasn't really doing it for me. I was sober. I was not drinking or anything like that, but I would get to where I would start fantasizing about doing cocaine. I had my own apartment now, man. Like, well, no one would know.
Yeah.
I just go get a little bit. That's the biggest lie ever, right? And I didn't know at the time the power of your thought process. Now I know it's like when you start, well, usually it starts with, wait a sec, they're going out of town. They're going to be out of town for a few days. I'm not working. If I'm going to do it, this would be a perfect time.
Yeah.
No one's going to find out. That's usually how it starts. And then you start fantasizing about what it's going to be like. I'm not going to do it, right? But if I did, now I figured out a way to properly do this drug, right? If you fantasize like that long enough, that is a very dangerous place to be in recovery. Your thought process is very powerful. So I ended up having to go back to Baton Rouge, and that was just the start of the next 5 years of my life in and out of rehab. Halfway houses, in and out of apartments, living with my parents. To be honest, it all gets jumbled up. I can't even remember which order stuff happened. But, well, let me back up. In 2007, the very beginning of 2007, I went to this Christian support group. And I knew that's what I needed to do. At this point, I was desperate enough. I knew that I didn't want crack in my life. I could not. It was already hard enough for me to be an adult. When you add that, it was impossible. I couldn't keep down jobs, it was just like, I didn't have a college degree. So when you're 24, 25, I didn't have any skills. So the amount of money I made was already low. It was so hard for me to survive. And I knew, Ross, if you keep binging every 6 weeks and blowing all your money, like something's got to give. And they went to this meeting, and there was a guy named Martin Britt. His sister was pretty well known in Baton Rouge. She was the anchor on the evening news, long-time anchor. So I was like, interesting, all right. And he had a old school slideshow, and he started talking about the home of grace. And I was like, okay, at this point, I think I was, I'd got my own apartment. I got my own apartment. I'd gotten a good job. I was actually trying at this point. I don't even think I was drinking at this time. But he's talked about this home of grace, and I just looked around and like something inside me was like, you need to go there.
Yeah.
You can't afford to go there, but you need to go. And you know, if you ask your parents, they will find a way. And I probably didn't do it right then. I'm sure I went out and binged a couple more times and was like, hey.
One for the road, right?
Well, you know I need to go here, but like, I got a job. How am I going to tell my boss? All these things. But sooner or later, I had a strong conviction that you need to go to is a Christian 3-month recovery center in Mississippi. You need to go to the Home of Grace. So I went and talked to my parents. I didn't want to lose my apartment. I had gotten this really cool apartment in a very cool part of Baton Rouge, and I had been on a waiting list to get it. I was like, I had to have this place. I ended up getting it. So lo and behold, my parents were like, not only will we pay for you to go to the Home of Grace, compared to other rehabs, the cost was very low, right?
Yeah.
It was more money than I had, but comparatively, it was very cheap. And not only will we do that, we will pay your rent while you're gone and your electricity or whatever. Your job is you need to be honest with your boss, and you have to do all the intake stuff. We're not making a phone call. We're not doing anything to kind of see how willing I was to do it. And I did it all.
What a great response.
And, man, I learned something during that process that has stuck with me. When it comes to these situations with your job, it's a job related. Sometimes it's legal stuff. Man, if you just gut level honest with people and they know it's like, this has got to be really hard for him to be honest about.
Yeah.
Doors fly open. Their guard goes down and they'll be like, how can we help? And that's exactly what happened. They did say like, look, you got your job. They paid my health insurance while I was there, so I wouldn't lose it when I got back. But they said, when you come back, there's going to be some drug tests, some random drug
accountability.
Which, when you're trying to do good, you don't have a problem with that. Like, yeah, sure. So I went to the Home of Grace, and man, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. From the first day I got here, I met a guy named Johnny Carrier, and we hit it off from the beginning. I loved everything about the Home of Grace. It was almost, I hate to say this because it's not what it is, but to me at that age, I went during the summertime. There's like a creek you can swim in, and like there's dogs everywhere. You could go like exploring. It was almost like summer camp / rehab. And I hate to say that because it's really not, but at that age, that's what I felt like. But the big takeaway for me was, and I still wasn't ready yet, right? But I knew that if I ever wanted to go all in, I could find people that I related with, and for lack of a better word, I thought were cool. Like I could kick it with them. I could actually hang out and not being like, this sucks. These people are boring. Because look, there's certain things that I've gone through my drug addiction that, like, if you haven't been through that, there's a big part of my life that I don't know how to talk to you about.
Right.
And it even kind of distorts your sense of humor, just kind of have a kind of kooky way of, I don't know, that's just kind of my view on it. So when you're around other people that have been through that struggle and are also being like, I'm a Christian, it was very eye-opening for me. I'd never really been around that kind of group of people before. That coupled with, up to that point, I feel like I had a very elementary understanding of the Bible. It depended on what church my parents were going to. Whatever the preacher was saying, that's what I believed. I think human beings don't realize how impressionable that they are. You think a certain way, but it's like, well, what are you listening to? What are you reading? Usually that's highly influential on how you think. People think they're more independent than they really are.
Amen.
So I came to the Home of Grace, and it was like, well, it's not about that book that preacher wrote. That stuff's all fine and dandy. What does the Bible say about this? Let's get it directly from the source. So the education that I got at this place was huge. I started being like, well, no, this is what I can honestly say what I believe and back it up with scripture, right? And Christianity, the Bible is an integral part of that. That's how you back up what Christianity is and what it's not. And I left on fire. I was still very young, very immature. I still knew that there was a part of me that was having a hard time fully surrendering. But I knew well enough that I think my expectations of what life was going to be like when I got out were not realistic. So I got out and I'm like on fire, right? I go to these churches, but look, I'm like the last to get there, and I'm the first person to leave. I wasn't talking to anybody. Once again, it was then hard for me to find people that I really related to. But I wasn't talking to my old friends. I was doing what I was told. You know, you need to make new friends if your friends are not walking the same line that you're trying to walk, right? Most of my friends, all of my friends, I say friends at this time, I wasn't talking to them, but smoking pot, drinking, going out to bars, going to concerts, eating acid. That was it. That's what they did. They were still not doing cocaine and stuff like that. If they were doing it secretly, and I didn't really know about it. And most of them were successful. They graduated college and stuff. But I still knew if I'm going to do this thing, this Christian life that I just learned about, those are not people right now, at least this soon getting out of treatment, that I need to be hanging around with. But like I said, I wasn't really making any new friends. I was kind of, I would say, antisocial at this time. I got out. Like I said, I was not making new friends. I thought people were going to be a lot more like, I go to a church and it's just like, hey, come be a part of all these things. Right. And like making it known that like, hey, you're welcome. Like, come on. It wasn't like that. And it was naive of me to think that it really is like that. Maybe for some people. But, and, you know, honestly, when I was going, because I was still kind of college age, maybe old college, kind of maybe right out of college. So the collegiate ministry groups that I would go to, looking back on it, I should have been going to just like regular Bible studies, men's Bible studies. But I was going with my brother to these things. And the stuff that I had experienced in my life was so far out of the realm of any of these kids had ever even, they didn't even know this stuff existed. And it was very hard. It felt juvenile to me. Yeah. It was like, let's talk about some real stuff. Yeah. Like, not how to tell your professor that you're a Christian when he says that evolution. I mean, it was just like, you know, I was so, I don't want to say past that, but it was just not what I was really interested in learning about.
Hey, thanks for tuning in, everybody. We hope you enjoyed episode number 1A. Don't forget to tune in next week and join us for episode 1B, the second part with Ross Richard. Thanks for being here.